Fairy Dirt by Thomley. Chapter 2. Brynn could feel the anticipation balling up in the pit of her stomach before she even stepped foot onto her property at the end of her walk home from school. She knew there was no chance of getting out of practice today. Knowing her luck, she would probably have to work extra over the weekend to make up for her slacking off during the rest of the week. She went straight up to her room once she was in her house and changed into her training clothes. She sat down on her bed for a moment and thought about Max. She wanted to go to the beach with him so badly. He was like a piece of forbidden fruit. She knew that she needed to stay away, despite her overwhelming desire not to. His strength and masculinity were matched only by his wit. He listened to most of the same kind of music as Brynn, and even liked the same type of movies and books. That made him even better to hang out with. He always tried to make sure she was laughing or smiling. Sometimes her face even hurt from grinning by the time she made it to her next class. It was like he had been sent to her just to get her out of her doldrums. If only she could be with him in a bigger capacity. Just like all of her other friends, she couldn't be completely honest with him about why they couldn't hang out very often. She had been able to go to his house a few times to work on school projects, but he was never invited to hers. He understood. Most people thought it would be uncomfortable to be around a very strict and religious household anyway. She doubted that anyone actually wanted an invitation. If the situation was reversed, she would be just fine not receiving an invitation to deal with that. She tried to push those thoughts out of her head as she headed down to the grounds to unsuccessfully cast some spells. Just get it over with. Yes, the other girls will be mean. Your spells are probably gonna suck. Nothing's gonna work out right. It is what it is. Just get it over with. And whatever you do, don't you dare cry. She repeated her mantra over and over in her head during her walk. She didn't have any inspirational rocky type of music to play on her way to cast, so this would have to do.
It's about time you decided to come out here and pretend to contribute.
Her sister Fiona snorted as she tossed her shimmery hair over her shoulder. The bright colors underneath was eye-popping today. She despised Fiona. She was everything that Brynn wasn't. She was blonde, beautiful, and a powerful caster. Everything that a fairy should be. Brynn just walked by her without even acknowledging the insult. What would be the point of it anyway? Responding would only make things worse. She couldn't win. She never did.
Great comeback.
Fiona mumbled to one of the other girls nearby. They all looked over their shoulders and smirked as they continued to cast. Brynn continued to do what she did best and ignored them. She decided to try 3 spells that she hadn't tried before. One would make it rain rose petals, one would turn her into the size of a cat, and the other one would turn a butterfly into a unicorn. She knew she would not succeed at any of them, but it would ensure that she would be out of practice in a very timely manner. Call it self-sabotage if you want. She called it working smarter, not harder. She could retreat to her room and pretend that she was somewhere else, probably with Max. That's who she usually imagined she was with when she was lost in thought. The location often changed, but Max always remained the same. Sometimes it was the beach. Other times it was in the woods, or somewhere nice outside. The where didn't matter. It was the company that did. As she predicted, casting was a disaster from the start. She recited what she thought was the spell for rain, and nothing happened. She stood there in the yard, dumbfounded. The other girls snickered at her and whispered to each other as they continued to cast advanced spells that actually worked. She wanted to quit and go running back inside. Tears were beginning to sting her eyes, but she refused to let anyone see her cry. After a moment, rose-colored sparks began to shoot out from her fingertips. It started out slow and subtle, almost unnoticeable. Unfortunately, it escalated very quickly. She tried to conceal her fright, but it was no use. She was visibly shaking, and it was beginning to draw attention. It didn't hurt, but she was about to have a total freak out. She had no clue what she should do, and other people were beginning to panic. She closed her eyes and tried to calm herself when she got a sudden urge to lift her hands to the sky. Once she did, her spell came to an absolute head. Brilliant pink fireworks appeared over everyone. They were breathtaking and bigger than anything she had ever seen on Independence Day. She had somehow turned her fingers into firework shooters. Fantastic. Luckily, it only lasted for a few moments before the sparks gradually retracted and she was back to normal.
Nice job, Brynn. The whole neighborhood probably saw that. Do you want to get us all in trouble? The police could show up. How would we possibly explain all of this?
Fiona rolled her eyes at the other girls in her group, and Brynn blushed as she looked away. Sweat was rolling down her forehead. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. This sucked. She wasn't enduring this by choice, so she wished that Fiona would just leave her alone for once. Fiona had always let it be known that she thought that she was better than Brynn, even though they shared the same bloodline. At least the boy fairies were nicer to her. They mostly just kept quiet and kept their distance. That was fine with her. She didn't like any of them anyway. For her cat-size spell, she didn't change her size at all. She had to admit that she was baffled when she recited the spell, and just like before, nothing happened. What were the odds that it would happen 2 times in a row, even for her? She began to worry that she was about to see sparks again, or something even worse, when she felt something brush up against her leg. She jumped at the sudden sensation. After the last display, her nerves were definitely on edge. What could that possibly be? The possibilities at this point were absolutely frightening. When she finally mustered up the nerve to look down, she saw the cutest gray striped tabby cat that she had ever seen. He rubbed his long, white-whiskered face against her as he purred loudly. It sounded like he had a little motor inside of him. She leaned down and pet him as he rolled onto his back, revealing a fluffy brown belly. It was instant love. Could fairies grow up to be crazy cat ladies? That's a life she thought she could deal with. At least I got the cat part right, she thought to herself. She sighed audibly as she continued to pet her new feline friend and wondered if her mom would let her keep him. She decided to let him roam around the yard for a bit. His presence wouldn't harm or distract anyone enough to be a problem. One more spell to go and she could put this trying day behind her. She was so beyond ready for it to end. So she closed her eyes, visualized one of the butterflies that were fluttering around the bright pink and orange zinnias in the yard, and delivered the spell. When she opened her eyes, she couldn't believe what she saw. It was incredible. She actually managed to turn one of the butterflies into a magnificent unicorn. Was this a joke or something? Her eyes quickly darted around her. She was so proud of herself. It was beautiful and majestic. The silky white coat it adorned had a slight rainbow-colored tint that shined brightly in the sun, almost like an oil slick in a puddle of water. Its horn was solid white. It stood obediently before her, looking into her eyes like it understood why it was there with her. It knelt down, as if to offer her an invitation to come aboard. She hopped onto its back and trotted around for a while. When she dismounted, she gave it a pat on the head and turned him back into his original butterfly form. None of the other fairies said a word, although all eyes were currently on her. Of course, they didn't have the decency to say anything nice when she actually got something right. It didn't matter, though. She just rode her on conjured unicorn and nobody could take that away from her. She dusted herself off and pompously marched inside. She didn't care if it was just one spell. It was enough, especially for her. The still presently spellbound cat followed closely behind her, making its way into the fairy house. Her whole fairy family lived together. So as one would imagine, their home was very sizable. It looked like a castle. Well, it was like a modern castle, really. Not like the castles you think of from the days of kings and queens. It was 3 stories high, made of dark red brick, and was covered in vines and greenery. It was set far back in the woods, giving it extra protection and seclusion. The whole property was surrounded by a 10-foot wooden privacy fence. It was on 20 acres of land, and the house itself was about 15,000 square feet. It had to be that big, though. There were at least 20 people scurrying around at any one time. Often there would be more. The last thing needed with that many personalities was a bunch of shared bathrooms and bedrooms. They were lucky to be able to have such a comfortable living space. It was more skill than luck, though. One of the perks that came with being magical was wealth. Their specials gifts allowed them to afford to live the way they did. Everyone on the outside attributed it to contributions from people who supported their crazy religious cult. It wasn't a good thing for people to think, but it was safer for them to think that rather than the truth. It was part of their job as an adult fairy to keep up that persona. They learned how to charm people into doing things for them, and that usually involved money or items of great value. This encompassed a wide array of schemes ranging from winning the lottery and acquiring prized possessions to landing lucrative jobs. Brynn was happy to have one more year before she had to deal with any of that. For now, she would enjoy human high school and her youth. Once it was gone, she knew the responsibilities that would await her were significant. Please like and subscribe for more free audiobook content.